And welcome to Conservatives Talk.
We got a pretty interesting show this week.
I think that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, like for starters, the left backs the blue, but only political institutions.
And CRT runs rampant in our educational institutions.
Bah, bah, bah. It's a little, in-sync dance move. Anyway, plus, what is culture and can it be appropriated?
And life wins big in Fulton County.
And also, Buck's been talking about how BRIC has ties to the overdose surge.
He's also been laughing that the CDC is now running scared.
It's going to be a pretty good show.
Stay tuned. And welcome back to Conservatives Talk. My name's Justin.
And this is Jamie.
And again, Jamie's preferred pronouns are America and first.
Absolutely.
So we like to start off every show by encouraging everyone to like and share all the content that they see come across on any of our platforms that we produce and put anything out on. Also, make sure that by liking and sharing, you're helping us to get higher into the news feed and helping us to get our message out to more people than if we were just doing it on our own. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with anything that we are producing and putting out there. That way you're able to really catch all of our content and make sure you don't miss anything. If you're able to go to our website, that is conservativestalk.org. It's on the screen there in front of you, and hit the sponsor tab in the upper right-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner and help us out with what you're able to. Every little bit goes a very long way with the show. Everything goes right back into it, and we rely on sponsorships to really be able to continue to produce these and put these out to where we are. While you're there, also make sure that you sign up for our email list. We know we keep saying it's coming. It is coming.
September is our goal.
Yes, we are wanting to start producing a bi-weekly newsletter that will go out. And I'm liking more and more the idea that when we put this out, it will be kind of the sneak peek of what it is that we're doing that's really got us excited.
Absolutely. And look, I'm not going to lie, and this is totally random, but we've noticed a void, especially as you start to get people like Hometown Headlines in Floyd County continue to write these very left articles.
Oh yes,
it's time for us to really.
He's about as big as rag as they come.
I mean, he's absolutely awful. Like if you could take the Democrat policy and put it into one person, it's Hometown Headlines. So I say all that to say this, we're going to start this newsletter. We're going to start seeing more from us. We're thanks to the sponsors that we have, we're able to reach out more, and we're venturing out into other things. And you're going to see a lot more, not just content, but a lot more interaction and production from us, not just through video, but through articles. And we're going to be working with some other people to get some other specials and things out there. So your sponsorships have gone a long way so far. They're going to continue to go a long way. And please, subscribe to our email services so that you can get all of our written content as well.
So let's jump right into your favorite parts.
80 days until we beat Stacey Abrams. Cannot wait.
We say it every single show. It never gets old. I can't wait until she has to go up on stage and finally say, I lost.
After 8 years, she will finally concede.
Well,
4
maybe,
but hopefully between the 8 years that Brian Kemp will be governor, she'll finally decide that she's going to concede. Because honestly, I'm not gonna lie to you. After we beat her again, I think she's going to continue to try to fight it and continue to try to contest it. And then once he's finally out of office, she'll probably give up because that's just how they operate.
Well, I'm curious to see whether or not she's going to start what the Democrat, the left, or the left has dubbed as the big lie. Whether or not she's going to say that oh, this election was stolen.
Well,
like
you
she
know
did
what's
the last
crazy?
time around.
You know what's crazy to me is they try to demonize the right for the big lie, but they started it.
Yes.
They literally started it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not just her. Hillary Clinton didn't want to concede at first. Stacey still hasn't conceded from 26 from what was that? 20 what 18. Year was that? 18? Yeah, from 2018. Like you just have this like run amok of like you know what it reminds me of? Honestly, before we get in the show, it reminds me of when people are doing something wrong. So they try to point the finger at somebody else. Because think about it. Like
that's a good point.
They tried to point the finger at Trump for the FBI investigation. While Joe Biden and
well, that's something we're going to get into.
Sorry. Getting a little early, but I'm getting a little heated. You can't tell I'm passionate about the show this week.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump right on into it.
So let's get started.
So the left the left is backing the blue now, but it's interesting to note that the only reason why, or the only actual quote unquote blue institutions are these blue law enforcement organizations that they're backing are these political and politicized institutions. So,
as a bureaucrat, right? Because I'm definitely the bureaucrat on the show.
He is. You got to come up with a graphic for that.
Bureaucrat, man, that's me. Anyway, as a bureaucrat, right? I do not consider the three-letter agencies to a certain degree law enforcement. Here's why. Yes, they are law enforcers. Yes, they're post-certified agents. Okay, and
well, I don't know about post-certified. I don't know about post-certified.
That's something we have to look into.
I think that might be just
some of them
states.
Some of them are post-certified. Some of them, I think, there's another level of classification if you're a national,
federal.
Yeah.
Yes.
I say all that to say this: it is a different type of process and a different understanding, right? What I am disheartened about, and which is something that I said on the last show, is as bureaucrats, when we are in our of course we have opinions, but when we're in our bureaucratic duties, there should not be anything political involved. That is kind of the mantra, right? It is, this is what the code is. I'm not going to do you a favor just because you think like I do, or you think opposite than I do. I'm not going to treat you any differently. So I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with right now. But that being said, at the national level, at the federal level, I feel that you're supposed to be higher than or act in a higher regard, right? So that's what really disheartens me about this entire situation.
So for reference, what he's referring to as with the alphabet agencies, you have organizations like the DOJ, the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the IRS. All of these organizations have, to some capacity, law enforcement powers. They have arrest powers. They have investigatorial powers. So the fact that essentially the Democrats are now coming out and quote unquote claiming that they're backing the blue, but only in fact backing these organizations that essentially they are able to appoint the heads of and ultimately the underlings of those organizations, these political institutions, which is what they are. They're not just law enforcement agencies. They are the political arm of law enforcement.
Well, and see, I don't even like using that phrasing, right? Because
you might not. That's exactly what they are to me.
And here's the thing. A lot of people view them as a political arm because there is that appointment power that is bestowed upon by administrations, right? But there's a duty there. Okay. Anyone who knows me in my personal life, and here's why I look at it this way. Because if you were to, when I do my job, my day job, I do not care what your political affiliation is. I will respect you as a person, however you ask me to. There are people who come in my office who ask me to, you know what I mean, go by their pronouns, you know what I mean, ask if I wear a mask. We establish all of that, or I'll keep my distance, you know.
Do you use America First pronouns in your office?
No, I don't use pronouns at all. I don't.
You got to start using America First pronouns in your office.
See, that's what I mean, though.
I'm gonna put that in all.
But here's
bios.
that's what I mean, though. There's a time and a place to be political.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we have allowed news outlets, and mainly news outlets, and far left places like Hometown Headlines locally and other organizations to kind of continue to push the narrative that everything is political.
He's really gotten your crawl, isn't he?
It's not that. I'm just over it. I'm over it because this goes to my point, right? Of the fact that like not everything has to be political. Even some things that are political like don't need to be talked about as a political feature. You know what I mean? Like here's the thing. I'm just going to use this as an example. Everyone knows that Rome has their rally every year.
Yes, the Tillman rally.
We have it every year. And every year it's become, until we get a 14th district event, it is kind of the 14th district event. So what we're starting to see is you got people who will come out and try to say, oh, well, you're going to allow this. Why even ask the question? You're going to come out and you're going to ask, are we going to allow guns? Of course we are.
You know what we should do? We should get some of our listeners to open carry. A couple of long guns and concealed carry,
you know what we need to do?
Then just kind of surround him and escort him throughout the entire area.
No, you know what we need to do? We need our listeners to boycott Hometown Headlines.
That's very true. Yes, that's a good point.
We need to, because the last time we actually went and did this, he stopped allowing comments on his page.
Yeah.
Because we started to boycott him.
Well, not just boycott him, but
correct him.
Yes, and to confront him on every wrong issue that he puts out there.
I mean, like, you know, for whoever your Republican, you know, primary pick was, okay, it was a Republican. All right. This guy wrote an article as a columnist, and let's
clarify,
a columnist, right? Wrote a love letter to the Democratic candidate who lost.
Drastically lost.
Like, I mean, like it was pure obsession with the like 4 paragraphs that he did, and like wrongfully quoted some of the Republican information, which is the majority of the county.
Yes.
But wanted to do 4 paragraphs about a Democrat that lost. Didn't even win their primary nomeration. That's the person we're talking about. Who was, you know what I mean? That's the person we're talking about, right? I digress, though.
Yeah, let's get back on topic.
The reality is, though,
screw Hometown Headlines.
Screw Hometown. That's the point. Boycott Hometown Headlines.
We'll start a hashtag with that.
Absolutely, put it on this video.
We will do.
The basis of what I'm saying is this: is that when it comes to law enforcement, everyone as an individual has their own opinion. Okay, but as an agency, as a department, you have to put that aside. You know, we even elect sheriffs on partisan lines, but the sheriff, when he does his duty, it's not, I'm going to help you more because you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. That's not it. They have a job to do that is supposed to be for the betterment of your community. That's why I have a problem with the left is doing, because now they're trying to take this language of back the blue, knowing daggum well that they were defund the police 2 weeks ago.
Well, they're still defund the police. They're only supporting or backing these the national or the federal organizations. They're still against any of the local, state, and county level affiliations. The only law enforcement agencies that they're really getting behind are the national politically affiliated institutions. So it's not that they're actually backing the blue; they're just backing the political institutions, and that's exactly what these law enforcement organizations and these entities at the federal level.
Can we call them bureaucrats?
That's technically what they are. They are technically law enforcement.
I understand that, but like that to me, that
the bureaucratic law enforcement are law enforcers. We'll put it that way, because I mean that falls into a lot of categories with that. But that's the only people that they're actually backing. They're not backing your local policeman. They're not backing your local sheriff's office. They're not backing your local state patrol or your state troopers. They're only backing these federal institutions that they have the ability to appoint these political heads to these agencies and then charge them with the ability to then essentially go into, well, for example, to go into somebody's home, raid their home for purely political issues. In that sense, we're talking especially about what happened in Mar-a-Lago with President Trump.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about whether or not they're actually going to release the affidavit that allowed for that warrant to be signed.
I feel like they have to. They have to, because here's the thing. You're going to do more damage to this country, like as a bureau, again, right? And we're going to talk about a lot of things that view themselves as neutral. And for me, I completely view...
There is nothing in this country that's neutral anymore.
Which is the problem.
Yeah.
I believe that is the problem.
I think it's the cure.
No. Because once you politicize everything...
It's the cure to the problem that we have now.
Well, here's the thing, okay? Right. I jokingly mentioned this in a previous show about just invoke Article 5, right? Along the same lines, when there is no middle, when there is no neutral, there's no 68% if you're a statistics person, and everything is politicized, civil war. We got to figure something out. Because we become too polarized. I agree.
We need to be, in a sense, we need to be neutral, but we have come to a point to where it has become so politicized, and specifically within these bureaucrat agencies, so politicized to the left, that we need to have that polar opposite that's coming in to correct where it had to where it's gone.
It's not that
I'm back to that middle.
It's not that I'm disagreeing with that, but I mean, here's the thing. I've always been the type of person is when you see the fork in the road, like I go straight because like someone's leading me in that direction for their own reason. Someone's leading me in that direction for their own reason. Right. As an individual, as a massive of individuals, we have to make our own choices. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's in between them. Now I may walk more to the left or I may walk more to the right, but common sense and the fact that where I'm getting
walk more to the left.
No. I walk more to the right, but I'm still in the middle. Anyway, my whole point is this, is that we got to stop letting these purely for-profit, politicized, left or right organizations try to tell us what's important and dictate what's the rule of law. We know as individuals what's right and what's wrong.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. We see the left coming out and saying, and well, not just the left, but also some significant figures on the right that we're going to get into in a minute, coming out and saying that, you know, we support the FBI, get off their backs. They're doing their jobs, all this other stuff, when in all reality, they're political and partisan hacks. But at the same time, when, for instance, so they're supporting, quote unquote, the law enforcement, but they are denouncing the law deciders and the law decision makers.
So I want to be clear
in regards to,
go ahead. Yeah, I'll let you finish your statement.
What I'm talking about here is they uphold the FBI, but yet they denounce the Supreme Court.
And the reason why I think they're doing that is truly for political reasons. But I personally support the FBI. What I think that is valuable is, and again, just like I said last show, I will still hold true that there are people at the top that still hold the value of the oath that they took. They did not take an oath to a political party.
I would say
they took an oath to protect the United States of America.
I would say it's less of the people at the top, more of the folks on the ground, the folks that are actually going in doing the searches and seizures. If they are the ones that are essentially being thrown in the crosshairs that they didn't intend to get into. They're the ones that actually maintain that neutrality or want to have that neutrality. It's the folks at the top that are the ones that are causing all of this division, and they're the ones that have essentially politicized these law enforcement institutions.
It's not that I disagree with you, right? Because these are appointed politically.
You can't disagree with me because I'm right.
It's not that you're right? But I still hold true to the value that, you know, these people took an oath. It don't matter what level you're at. You took an oath. Mm-hmm. So you can't enforce something that goes against that oath. If not, then you need to be impeached and removed. Period.
Well,
Okay,
you can't be impeached at that level. You can be removed.
I'm just using
specifically.
phrases.
Yes,
You know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. They,
you know what I mean?
need to be gone.
They need to be gone.
Yes,
Right. Because whether you're impeached, removed, fired, however it goes, let go,
arrested,
any of the sort. Okay. The reality is that if you're in a bureaucracy and in your official capacity, you did something that was political, you have gone against the foundation of what a bureaucrat is. If you do something outside of that official, there's a reason why once you get to a certain level in bureaucracy, you're not supposed to have any like official political capacity.
Well, what if so that kind of leads me to the mindset? What if or at least leads us into kind of the clip that we were that we have staged up for this, and I'm going to go ahead and play this real fast, and then we'll discuss what was said after that.
The Attorney General accountable for the decision that he made without attacking rank and file law enforcement personnel at the FBI. The Republican Party is the party of law and order. Our party stands with the men and women who serve on the thin blue line at the federal and state and local level. And these attacks on the FBI must stop. Calls to defund the FBI are just as wrong as calls to defund the police. And in the wake of the 4 years that we endured the politicization of the FBI, the American people have a right to know the basis for this. This unprecedented action does demand unprecedented.
So you saw former Vice President Pence on the stage there, and essentially he was saying that these quote unquote efforts to or these movements to defund the FBI are the same as the attacks to defund the police. I want to get your take on that.
I agree with him.
Okay.
I agree with him 100%.
Why?
Here's why, right? Because we fundamentally shift what this party stands for the moment we start talking about defunding the FBI. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I think that the last part of his statement is the most important, that we got to know what the reason is, okay? Because, and I will say this, my opinion will shift if we do truly come and find out that this was a political reason that they raided Mar-a-Lago. I have no reason other than to believe that currently that it was anything other than political. Okay. But for my core belief in what America stands for and what America should be, I will not let that go so heavy-heartedly. If they come out and say that there was something actually valuable that they can release, declassify, and say, hey, this is what's going on, because I think that whatever it was better be declassified, because they better tell us. If they don't tell us, then they're only going to anger anyone who is still trying to hold on to some kind of belief in that neutral system.
Well, Trump's attorneys are essentially, so they're going to be going before the judge that would and make the argument that these records need to be unsealed. And I know that's what you mean. As far as with declassification, the only person that can actually declassify any sort of documents is the president.
Yep.
With presidential authority. But to unseal these records at the federal level within this court or within the judge that issued this warrant, but it's important to note that this same judge has also made disparaging comments against Trump in the past. So we know likely that it's not going to happen. And on top of that, the Department of Justice is also filed against them being able to release the affidavits that resulted in this search warrant to take place, because they say that it could essentially open up a door into how the federal government conducts its investigations. They said that it can ultimately lead to the unmasking of the quote unquote whistleblower or their inside person inside the Trump administration organization.
So the reason why I said declassified,
it's likely not going to happen.
Yeah, and the reason why I said declassified is because because of everything that Justin just said.
Yes,
there's been this debate on whether or not if technically Trump declassified them once they were in his possession outside of the Oval Office. Because there's debate on when and how a president can. Is there a formal process for it for him to declassify something? Is it a memo? There's no real written documentation on what constitutes declassification of federal documents, because only the president can do that. But if he did that and basically kind of left it on sheet of paper that no one sees anymore and then took the document with him, is it declassified or not? So that's kind of where.
Well, the one of the reports that's coming out is that these documents were labeled at the top secret level simply or because of the fact that they were associated with our nuclear armament. In all honesty, I cannot, unless it was an actual setup, I don't see presidential administration ordering the GSA to pack up nuclear armament information into boxes and have them shipped down to Mar-a-Lago.
Like, here's the other thing. I'm not watching my words, but I'm just saying it this way, right? There's business savvy and crazy, right? Because everyone's insane until you're proven wrong, okay? Or until you make money off of it. And then there is like corruption, okay? And I think that they're trying to link the two when it comes to Trump, because, here's what I mean by that. When you start talking about, again, like I said last week, someone who probably has never packed their own suitcase, has for years allowed other people to pack up their stuff and like move it around for them, things like that. And then you start trying to tie that to saying that there's some undermining meaning for this, that he intended to do this, all this other kind of stuff, but you're not looking at the so-called whistleblower or who they work for or what their political leanings are. Like, that can all play a major role into it that won't happen until you go to court and try to figure out discovery.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with the political leanings issue and the entire argument that's been made with this, because, well, and I say that simply based upon speculatory information that's been put out about this, being that it was likely a Secret Service official that leaked this information to the Department of Justice that inevitably led to the warrant raid that happened.
Well, see, and I don't want to seem hypocritical, right? But there's two things that you got to look at. You got to look at what these agencies represent as a whole, and you got to look at the actions of an individual. I think James Comey is the perfect example of that. And for those of you, again, who haven't, I've mentioned this a couple shows ago, there's a show on Showtime that does a mini series about the history between presidents and FBI directors. James Comey is a perfect example of someone who potentially has political aspirations, who has at the top of the FBI done something unprecedented multiple times against the president for political reasons. What we cannot allow as citizens is that to become the norm.
Well, it's not the first time.
It's not the first time from the start of the agency.
Well, it's actually quite common. I mean, so look at J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, that's what I mean, from the start of the agency, right? Because Hoover did things that were
treasonous.
Like, we'll get into the next portion for the next. Like, I mean, like, scary stuff. Like, yes. Nixon tiptoed around him even when he created everything. And if you haven't done this yet, go look at the letters that J. Edgar Hoover sent to Martin Luther King, because those are profound. Now, like, even for the era that it was in, because I always relate everything to a time frame, right? Because like some things sit outside the norm because you have to look at the customary culture that was there at first. And we'll get to culture and cultural appropriation in a minute. But what, even for the time that it was, he was over the top with that.
Yes. So. But some of the examples that we can point to, or that I can at least point out to, that shows that this agency has become the political arm or essentially the political arresting arm of the executive branch, which I mean, ultimately it technically is. But that being said, it is also being used for partisan reasons, and we can look at several things over this. Just here within the most immediate time frame being, you have the investigations into Trump with the witch hunts with the Russian collusion deal. That was initially started out with FBI information that came out. Then you're looking at the now investigations into President Trump with the January 6th deals. We all saw what he said. We all heard everything that went on. There was he did not tell folks to go into there and do what happened there. Then we have what happened to Mar-a-Lago. So taking that and then comparing it to the fact that you have a sitting U.S. president's son who is an admitted drug addict, where they're able to track and find resources where he not only lied on federal documents to obtain firearms, but then had these firearms disposed of illegally in a sense. And then at the same time, he is working with these foreign agencies against the interests of the United States. But yet there are, we still have yet to hear anything about this investigation, but all we're hearing about is the Trump investigation and what's going on with that. The only progress we're seeing is on that, not in the actual Biden investigation.
Yeah. And
so
what a tangle
dead.
web we leave, right? Because again, until I'm talking, I better see, in order to change my mind, I will fully support the FBI. And I believe that there's just some information that we're not supposed to know until they're ready to release it. I just pray on everything that they release what the purpose of this was, and we let the American people decide.
Quick, fast, in a hurry.
And yes, that they release the information. Now, I will say this, though. When you got administration change, when I go back and you just kind of summed everything up, right? You got a director who clearly has had, and when I say Comey had political means, I'm talking about the fact that when you go back to the George Bush era, okay, when Comey was just an agent, he was not director yet. When Comey was just an agent, he did something that was unprecedented, and he came out and before a committee and tried to come out against President Bush because he alone and his entire agency, his entire division of the agency, felt that George Bush did something wrong. That was the first unprecedented political move. Okay. The second was the way he handled the Hillary Clinton investigation, because never in the history of this country, even with J. Edgar Hoover, who was literally writing handwritten death threat letters to Martin Luther King, never did that publicly. All that was released after both of them were dead. Never have we had anybody come out as the director and say there was something that was fishy going on here, and technically you could see it as illegal, but it's not, and we're not going to investigate. That's not, anyone who knows law enforcement, that's not his decision to make. That is your attorney general, that is your DA, that is whoever the legal enforcer is. They are only to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
So you're starting to see more and more of this. Now, again, I 1000% support what the FBI does. And I do continue to believe that there is a level of information that the masses should not know for whatever reason. I do believe that when you do something unprecedented, though, you got to explain yourself.
True statement coming from a true bureaucrat.
That's how Justin says I won.
No, not even remotely. Bureaucrat to me is a 4-letter word. So let's jump into the next topic, and that being your little the dance move that you just had.
Bye.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an NSYNC kid. I grew up with pop air.
Oh, I did too. Yeah, I know exactly what song you're talking about.
Do you remember they used to give out the little songs with like the little clip things at McDonald's? Had like a little one song on it. The what was that? The first iteration of the MP3.
Yeah. I remember walking around the halls of school and everybody having those clipped onto their backpacks and everything.
I know it.
It was maddening at that point.
I feel like Eminem off a six, like well, we had 6 Mile, they had 8 Mile, right? When you walk around with your Walkman. Anyway.
Wow. Anyway, so as we saw, there has been a very recent development on an issue that has come to light within a Minneapolis school or the school board there in that city, and that being that they have partnered with or they have entered into an agreement with, and I wanted to read this correctly, that the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers.
Yeah.
And essentially what this agreement says is that starting with the spring 2023 budget tie-out cycle, if existing or reducing a teacher who is a member of a population unrepresented among licensed teachers in the site, the district shall excise the least or the next least senior teacher who is not a member of an unrepresented population. So essentially, if you're
basically, if you're white,
matter how much seniority you have. If you're
you could
white,
be the oldest teacher there. If you're white, they're going to let you go. That's awful.
That is essentially employment based upon race, based upon the color of your skin. That's what it's come to.
I had a professor when I was an undergrad who I call my antithesis. I always have a problem saying that word. Antithesis, right? Because I am a Southern black male who's a Republican. He was a Northern white male who was a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And we would argue. We both of us, he was my sociology professor. Both of us have gone into professions where we study how people move individually and in masses and politically. But come from two completely different perspectives on it. Me and him would go at it about this topic or the surrounding aspects of this topic, because what they're trying to do is, for lack of a better phrase or word, is reparations, but by other means.
Yes.
Which is wrong. Point blank, period. I just like, because and me and you have had this conversation offline. Where does it end? Okay.
Exactly.
Because if you want to reprimand, if you want to give reparations to my people for slavery, what about the Japanese people that we basically put into the Holocaust here in America?
Well,
what about the Jewish community?
If you're even able to trace your lineage back to slavery, because there were several
that goes
Black
back
Americans that
can't, and that
were well, it's not just that, but they were not brought over as slaves. They were actually brought over as English citizens.
Well, I want to get into that and when we get to the next topic, when we start talking about culture, because I have a very unique perspective on that. Because it's just the way that we all have unique perspectives. We do, but it was just the way that I grew up. Every perspective is unique. As an African American, right? But my
race card now.
Throw it. But that's when it comes to this. Where do you stop? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because are you just doing it now because that's the culture you're trying to do? At what point are we going to say, you know what, we stole part of the West at a cheap rate in the Louisiana Purchase from Mexico and everybody else. We're going to give the whole Western states back to Mexico. That's why they got to come over here and
we kicked we kicked Mexico's butt for the Western states
down in Alamo. Yeah.
Yes. Goliad.
Yeah.
But
military history is his thing. I just kind of splice things together.
It's interesting to note.
If you can't tell.
After everyone started, or after the story broke about how they were essentially ethnically hiring and cleansing their ranks within the education staff, they came out and released another statement defending this. And this, I want to quote exactly what this statement says. It says, to remedy the continuing effects of past discrimination, Minneapolis Public Schools and the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers mutually agreed to correct language that aims to support the recruitment and retention of teachers from unrepresented groups as compared to the labor market and to the community served by the school district. So essentially what they're saying there is that we believe that because of prior actions, these educators are guilty and they need to be punished. And the way that we're going to punish them is that they're going to lose their position and their profession. And then they are kind of labeled as this. You are being punished because of your great grandparents. And it's a continuing cycle. It never ends because
here's my problem.
There's never enough.
Well, at what point does it change over?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like here's my other. There's 2 points I want to make real quick. We already see a decline in I guess you could say, the traditional white population in America.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at what point does what you do now have the adverse effect? Because if you continue to do this, I'm just gonna call it what it is, reverse racism acts, okay, and say, okay, well, we're gonna fire white people first, we're gonna pay white people less, we're going to do this. At what point do they become not only the minority, but the underprivileged? And then you're going to go back to the same, you're just going to flip flop what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The second thing I want to make, which is kind of contradictory to what I just said, is if that's how you really feel, then give them a better retirement and pay them more. That don't mean fire them secondary. Get them, like, say, hey, your next one chopping block, but we got a better severance package for you. Because we need, like, this teacher has the next senior merit and employment. They have a higher education than you. They were able to go higher. But because of that, here's the difference in what you would have done across retirement. If we force you to retire or go somewhere else early. There are other ways.
These aren't retirement.
These are forced fires.
Yes,
I know. But there's what I'm really getting at is to make a bold statement like this. Like, unless you can come out and defend it, and not just defending it with this garbage that they just did, defend it with, like, we have a history of, 73% hires of equal quality where we hired a white person or something like that, right? There, you got to come with something more than just, we want to allow for this. We want more African Americans in here. That in itself is racist.
Well, so right now, the Washington Post is reporting that 18% of the teaching staff is considered non-white, and 60% of the student population is considered a minority population. I would even argue that the percentage of the teaching staff is a reflection of the actual national diversity.
Which I will agree with that statement, but now I'm kind of understanding what they're doing. I think they're going about it wrong. Here's what I mean.
And I understand that in a sense that they're trying to reflect
the population,
what the student body is seeing, but at the same time,
you can't wrong someone just because you want to do something.
Well, not just that, but what world are you preparing the student for? If you're only allowing them to see this one specific ethnicity inside these classrooms, when they get out of these classrooms, what in the world are they going to walk into?
Yep. That's a very valid point that a lot of people don't think about, because we get so much from teachers that I don't think we really recognize. And
well, especially in this area being we'll call it an underprivileged area, the family structure is not very strong in these areas.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, what you could do is incentivize more minority teachers to come in. Mm-hmm. Okay, that doesn't mean that you move to age out or remove the non-reflective. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm trying to be, smart. But you see what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't mean move them out. That just means that, like, you can incentivize, and then, like,
in the new hiring process.
The new hiring process.
Yes.
You know, like there's ways around this that I will consider conservative value ways of doing this that still reflect what you're trying to do outside of this Marxism way of saying, you know, push these people out, bring somebody else in.
Well, I mean, we talk about this and we speak about how terrible that it is a reflection of the actual educational institutions across the country. But in all reality is that this law or this understanding, this agreement or this process is facially illegal, and it will not under any circumstances. The first time a teacher is fired, then they can point
Instant
back
millionaire.
to this. They will win that lawsuit in a heartbeat.
Instant millionaire.
So it's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act actually says that you cannot base employment on essentially your ethnicity or your race. There's even a Supreme Court ruling that was, I believe it was issued in '86, that says that you cannot fire white teachers because of past discriminatory acts of their predecessors or their generations before them. That cannot be. The sins of the father do not pass on to the son, and it's essentially what that says.
Yeah.
But that is exactly what they're trying to push with this: is the sins of the father pass to the son.
I have weirdly enough, like my parents and grandparents, my grandmother's main job was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt still is currently, I'll just say it, head of the science department for all Atlanta public school systems. She's the one who kind of goes through and picks the curriculum. Okay. And then my dad, when he retired, he became a teacher. Just because like education and helping others is just it's in us. That's just what our family does. Okay. I have a problem with this on a personal level because I just feel that once again, because someone took a class and they feel bad for something that didn't happen to them, they are now trying
something they did do.
Something they didn't do and didn't happen to them. They're now trying to like instill that evil on someone else, right? It's almost like a 400-year get back.
It's
for what?
Nature of victimhood.
Because here, to my earlier point, okay, where do we stop? There, I used to have a saying, okay, that no one comes to this country and I'll just say it gains respect without conflict. No one. The Native Americans who are already here, they came and they gained their respect because of conflict. They have their own territories. Okay. The English people who came over here for religious freedoms, they had to fight for that. They had to fight England to get their freedoms. The African Americans, we came here as slaves and now we're free.
Well, some of them.
We're still free. We're still, regardless of whatever, like, I'm going to get to that in a second. Like, you're still free. Okay. There's a whole cultural aspect that uniquely defines us as different. But we're still free. Same thing with the Hispanic Americans who are coming here now. The Japanese who came here, they put them literally in camps. Can you imagine?
Oh, well, no, absolutely. I could not.
Like just because we were at war, they rounded everybody up who was Japanese pretty much and put them in a camp.
Well, that was more heritage than culture.
Understood. Okay. Koreans, every single person who comes to this country fights for their own identity and their respect. That does not devalue anybody else. And we cannot continue to try to get this get back at white people or whoever because you feel some type of way.
Well, that actually is a great statement that leads into the other part of this. So the Department of Education in Virginia, where we saw these massive CRT curriculums being pushed through, that was the epicenter of the parent organizations that started to really see what
Moms for Liberty.
Yes, yep. Well, where we see these organizations coming out and pushing against all of this stuff. So the actual State Department in a curriculum that they were proposing were essentially, they were talking about how Washington should be left out as the father of our country. They eventually came back and they corrected this and said that this was an inadvertent error, There's a couple things that you can look at to show that this is not what we meant. But the fact is that we see, especially in Virginia, all of these policies, all these curriculum that are coming out. How can somebody that is not just a rational mind, that doesn't have a rational mindset, look at this and say, okay, I believe what you're saying there based upon what you've done in the past. But I just don't see how they expect us to believe what they're saying on that issue.
So here's my real problem is, we've reached a point to where we take academics as gospel, which is my whole argument with the left. And here's what I mean by that. Okay. For those who don't know the process, okay, when we talked about last week, right, the difference in between trade school, college.
Yes.
When you go the administrative route and go college, okay, here's how it works pretty much. You can go get associates or undergrad, or you can go get associates, blah, blah, blah. Your main thing's your 4-year and you get your bachelor's.
Mm-hmm.
Next, you move up to your master's, right? And then you can kind of go up and get your PhD and your doctorate. When you get to that level, there's a process to get it. So basically, when you get to your doctorate, you pretty much have kind of understood and learned everything from everybody else. You're now in the process of trying to put your own work out there and be published.
You're trying to craft your own own work. You're trying to leave your mark on this institution or on this understanding of everything that's going on.
Correct.
As opposed to just parroting everything that's coming back
correct.
at you, like your undergrad and your master's.
Correct. Because all your undergrad and your master's really is how well were you able to retain the information and regurgitate it? Mm-hmm. Just being factual.
Oh, no, you're absolutely correct.
You know what I mean? Because what most people still kind of forget and don't understand is when the Department of Education, when we set a curriculum across a state and across a country, that's the bare minimum, right? That is only duplicated at the bachelor level.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, it's just reiterated at the master level. You're just going in more detail on it. You're just now having to say, instead of talking about what that graph says, you're now having to take the information and create that graph. For your PhD, to get your doctorate, you're now having to go find that information, plot it, and then graphic and explain it. And so what I think we've reached as a problem in this country is that beforehand, that level used to be very small. You know what I mean? It used to be a very big thing to get your doctorate. But now what it really is a process. You go, you do a study, you get your study done, you put your thesis together, You send it to be peer reviewed, you have academics rip it apart, and then once it's ripped apart, you can come back and you can rebuttal it or not, but it's published. And then we take that as, you know what I mean? That's your work, you get your degree. So as academics, we see it that way, but those who want to use that or take that and say, we need to teach this perspective for everyone, is where we're starting to see a problem. So
essentially, if I'm understanding your perspective on that correctly, is that this when you get into the higher level institutions and you get into the higher level educational levels, it has become such a shallow pool as far as the individual and the original ideas and the original interpretations and everything. We're starting to simply see the parroting back of a lot of ideas and concepts that had come before them. And a lot of these that had come before them are at least are being impressed upon them would be more in a line set of what the left would agree with. But I'm really interested in focusing on the aspect of the shallowness of that pool, meaning that you don't really have a great wealth of originality in that sense. It's all a sense. It's all in a sense of just, I'm going to call it exactly what it is, and it's going to lead us right into the next thing we're going to talk about, appropriation.
So before we go there, right, I do want to give an example, okay? So I will say this, and I'm going to give this example this way. As a social scientist, I'm a member of multiple social science honor societies and everything else. Are you on a cookie? No, but I have to detail that out in order to explain this. From a quantitative scientist perspective. All right. Understanding how a subculture works.
That would be qualitative.
Quantitative is the number. I always get those confused. From that perspective, right? The understanding of what this culture or what this idea of like, I was born a boy, but I want to be a girl. Okay. Is interesting. Ooh. It's interesting. And here's why. Because for whatever reason, we are starting to see a collective of people's minds who share a very unique disorder. And I call it a disorder because it's different, not because that it's something wrong, negative, or positive. All right. It's a disorder because it's different. It's not the norm.
It's a disease.
Okay.
Technically, it is a disease.
Your side of science can say that, mine has to call it a disorder. Okay.
Well, according to the actual psychology handbook, that describes all of these is a disease.
But yes, but as social scientists, we tend to use diseases as something that's viral. Anyway.
Well, the way you're describing it does appear to be viral.
What I'm trying to say is this.
I know what you're getting at. I'm just.
I know. You're just. Anyway, my whole point, that whole perspective is this. As a scientist, it's interesting that they think that way, but that's not for the masses to be taught, because it taught in the sense of as a norm, because it is not a norm.
No, not even remotely close.
It is not a norm. So to highlight it as a norm is not okay, because the perspective of education is what is the norm, and that's how we get people to be through the process. Everyone talks about the fact that school is a process. It is. Because you really go to school to learn how to fit and work inside of society.
To essentially get the bare basics of how this works.
How do you function in America? How do you function at a basic global sense, to where whoever taught you can say that you left there and you go somewhere and you just don't screw it up.
And you become a productive member of society.
That's it. That's the only purpose of school. Otherwise, all of us would be homeschooled, because that's what you do at homeschool is you learn how to function inside of your subculture. So the understanding of those subcultures is important as a society so that we can look at it and we can understand the perspective, but it is not something that needs to be taught as a norm for the masses, because 0.001% of the entire population is not something that needs to be normalized.
Yes. Well, I mean, they want to normalize that in an aspect to make everybody not equal, but equitable.
Well, I believe that regardless of whatever you think, you have a right as a human being to be somewhat respected. Okay. The reason why I say somewhat respected, not fully respected, is because there are some things that as a society, whether we say it or not, we just can't get down with. And that's the whole point of voting. That's the whole point of...
It's essentially the social contract is what you're describing.
That's it. That's the whole point of actually being in a society, is us saying we respect you as a human being, and it's okay for you to do that behind closed doors over there.
But these are the rules.
Don't violate these rules. Otherwise, you have broken the social contract with everyone else around you. And I think that trying to normalize or change the social contract is where we keep getting this friction.
I got you. That's an interesting perspective.
Kind of lays in the culture.
That is a perfect segue into the next topic on that. And that is, what is culture and can it be appropriated? So wrote these down, and I want to, again, read these verbatim to where we're not, paraphrasing anything on this. So an English anthropologist, Edward Brunett Taylor, who essentially is one of the founding fathers of the idea of culture. He's one of the most famous authors on this issue. And he wrote that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So I also want to take it a little bit further and use the Oxford definition of what appropriation is. And that is the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. And to take it even further than that, we'll go with what the Encyclopedia Britannica defines as cultural appropriation, and that is that cultural appropriation takes place when members of a majority group adopt cultural elements of a minority group in an exploitative, disrespectful, or stereotypical way. So now that we've defined what culture is, we've defined what appropriation is, and we've defined what the encyclopedia defines what a cultural appropriation is. Is that something that we see happening in everyday American life nowadays? Or is this just something that is being thrown out there as a bombshell to try and demonize certain folks that are trying to essentially, well, for lack of a better term, what you were saying earlier, normalize something?
Here's my belief. I believe that we are currently misusing that term to fit what we want it to. I believe, see, here's the thing, right? And I go back and forth with this when we talked about BLM beforehand and all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What went on in the 1800s and the early 1900s with the jigaboos and
you can say the word I can't.
I know, and the characters of blackface and things like that. That is what I consider, and by definition, as cultural appropriation.
How is that cultural appropriation? Because you're not actually going into knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, or capabilities or habits.
But you're doing it.
You're bringing out.
You're taking those stereotypes and using them as disrespectful.
Well, you're taking physical characteristics and using the. I would argue that is not cultural appropriation. I would argue that is flat out racism.
So, I see that, right, and that's why I say people mix the two, because here's the difference, okay? Cultural appropriations is someone getting up there in blackface and twisting their hair, eating watermelon.
Again, I would say that's racism.
Racism is not doing any of that and calling someone a derogatory term that defines their race, like the N-word for black people, or like CH, you know what I mean, for Chinese people. Okay.
Well, so
to me, that's racism, because racism itself is just blatant open. You know when you see a racist, okay? Appropriations is where you're trying to do it and be joking, which is where I think that the term is being misused, because we have reached a point inside of America to where, like, you're either American culture or your subculture is what defines you.
So I would disagree on that, simply because I would say that both of those examples are just blatant.
That was the word I was looking for. Sorry.
Well, just blatant racism, just simply because, and just going on the actual basic definitions of these, so in reference to all those, what you were making, or what you were essentially, the examples you were giving, you were talking about physical characteristics and mannerisms that were then being made to use in a disrespectful manners, but that only falls into cultural appropriation when you're actually adopting cultural elements. Cultural elements are completely different from characteristics, physical characteristics that you were describing there.
So here's
cultural appropriation, in a sense of what they're describing on this, would be a guy walking into a Redskins game wearing the Chiefs hat with the eagle feathers in it. That to them would be cultural appropriation, because you're using that element of their culture that they use to award braves for acts of valor to denote a political football team.
Here's why I look at it as different. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is because in the modern term, that's what they want you to think that appropriation is, right? Which is why we got to this whole argument about is the Brave chop bad?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean?
I'm chopping all that.
While the Redskins changed their name, right? Because they feel that if you aren't from that culture, then you shouldn't be doing those gestures. Okay. Appropriation was originally when it was taken to try to move something, and watermelon itself is a really good example, because before Black Wall Street, right, out in Oklahoma, they had watermelon had become the main crop for Black sharecroppers. All right. One, because it was cheaper to get the seeds, and it was the easiest way that you could start building a farm and farm life when you first came out and got free. All right. What started to happen was that started being misconstrued, and it became a stereotype for Black people to eat watermelon, to demonize, disrespect, and derogatize those people. And then the watermelon market got captured. Okay. That's where the appropriation came in, is because it was the whole point of to use those gestures, use those actions to then try to steal the market share. All right. People are misusing that now, because what they're trying to do now is they're trying to say that, just like that you even wearing that or doing that just because of the color of your skin is an appropriation. But I again go back to the fact of America's been around for 240 something years. Okay. We've now reached the point to where your subculture, where you grew up, how you were raised, what you were taught to believe in, is your underlying value. So when I get upset, right, when someone tells me I'm white, all right.
You're not?
Well, see, that's the thing, right? And then there's some things to where, like, I've been in circles where people have said something, I'm like, hey, you know, I'm Black, right? Like, don't ignore that. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if you knew anything about where I come from, then you would understand why I dress, act, and talk and look the way that I do. Because my daddy was the same way. My granddaddy was the same way. That's how I was raised to be. I will never forget. It was, I don't even know what year it was. I'm pretty sure we're still in the 90s, right? Whenever early 2000s, when Black Hawk Down, the movie, came out.
Yes.
I was a little kid. I watched that movie with my parents, and this one statement kind of defines how I was raised. Because I was in Africa, I said to my dad, I one day want to go to the motherland. And anyone who knows my dad knows. My dad marched in the civil rights movement. My dad was redheaded and blue-eyed, though. Okay. But he firmly believed in treating people how they were as people. He said, son, if you ever want to go to your motherland, I can take you to your grandma's house over here in Bankhead, Atlanta. Both of them live less than a mile from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole purpose in that was this. It happens across multiple cultures, but I want to say, because the loudest one is the African American culture, right? I don't even like using the term African American, because Africans don't like Black people from here. And quite frankly, there's only a certain few of them. Like, if you're Nigerian, we get along. If you're South African, we get along. But there's some of them that are from other places over there where our cultures just don't mix. But the reality is because
to
we were different.
Ask one thing on that. Would that not be what you're speaking about? Would that not be classified as a subculture?
Correct. Because well, here's why I see the difference. Okay, because to me, and I'm gonna take it back to slavery after this, but to me, if you are African American and you didn't migrate, if you're black and you didn't migrate here from Africa, like showing documentation over the last 100 years or so, then you're a black American, which is unique. Or just American, which is unique. Okay. Because one thing that I think that we all continue to forget, and we're so quick to forget, is that if it was as simple as the Europeans just went over there and started rounding up black people and then shipping them out in slavery, then half of Africa would be empty. But the reality is black people over there sold us who have a history over here.
Yes. And it's also interesting to note that although the African slave trade was extensive, there's no question about it. It was very large. It did have some very overreaching ramifications, but there was also a very large and wide European and white slave trade in Africa.
All over.
And the United States is
that whole era, right? Like
there was a reason why the Marines were founded when they went to Tripoli to essentially kill the pirates that were abducting whites over there.
Not to really like take over this segment because I'm really passionate about this part, because I feel like part of what my job as a black conservative is to point out the fallacies in what the Democrats are trying to do to my people. Okay. Because they want to highlight
weight to take on.
It is, but thank God, like there are others like me, like YG and a few others. Okay. And even Calvin King, Janelle, because we all understand that, hey, look, like, yes, that happened to us. Once you get past that emotion, right? Look at what that whole era was. Because if you want to look at it that way, if you're in the state of Georgia and you can show whatever your history is from the state of Georgia all the way back to the founding of the colony, you were a prisoner. The reason why you were here was for slave labor and indestitute. Georgia
was a penal colony. Yes.
If you are native to Australian and you're not Aborigines, it was because you were a debtor. You were a prisoner that was worse than the prisoners that they sent to Georgia. And though there were some bad things that happened to us as Australians and African Americans, right? Can you imagine being the Latino population? Because what I mean by that is everyone just skips over the fact when we start going back, we talked about conspiracies last time, the Mayan calendar and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And everyone just leaves it at they vanished. No. They were literally slaved and breeded out.
Disease got several, got a very large
population. But what I mean by that too is when they were conquered, they killed a large portion of the men and they enslaved, raped, and captured and impregnated the women.
So to be clear, that's why that was not Hispanic at that time. That was Latin American.
Yes.
I would say that's an important distinction to make, because the Hispanic ethnicity didn't come around until after. And that's how come when you look at the South, even here, right? You look at the South, why everybody asks why Florida's different. Well, because they have Spanish heritage. Their culture, their true culture is different. It stems from Spain.
And so when you look at the Latino and you look at what we now call the Latin countries, right? A lot of that is, and why people as minorities say, well, they only like them more because the majority of them are white passing, right? Well, how do you think they got that way? After, generations of their whole culture being demolished, and you know what I mean? Like a good portion of them are English. And we've talked about this offline. Then you start talking about, look at South America, look at Chile, Australia. I mean, not Chile, Argentina, portions of Brazil, right? These are places that the Nazis fled to. When the Nazi when the German Empire, which is what we called the Nazi at the time, or the Nazi nation, thousands, not just a few, thousands of their head SS soldiers like left and went to Chile.
Yes.
And so when you start looking at South America and you're like, there's a lot of light-skinned people here. They must have been born that way. No. Genetics.
So one of the things that I want to look back into, we were talking about earlier, was the whole notion of the culture and the subculture, and I would even go as far as to say as the subculture.
Yeah.
As a culture in of itself is compatible to nationality. I would even make the argument in this sense of what culture is that we are not actually encouraging enough cultural appropriation, because because as America, we know for a fundamental fact that we are what is known as a melting pot. America's culture is made up of a vast multitude of different cultures that came to this country, that ultimately established our country and allowed us to grow to where we are, or at least established the country. And then based upon our own molding of these cultures, brought us to the greatest country and power in the world. I would argue that we are not encouraging this appropriation of the American culture to the point to where when you have some of these new folks coming into our country, they are not in a sense assimilating or appropriating our culture to the level of becoming actual Americans. They're just bringing what they were living in or their subculture to our culture and expecting us to then accept their subculture as culture.
I get what you're saying.
So I'm saying there's not enough cultural appropriation.
Because here's kind of my thought on that. I'm not disagreeing, right? But like in my mind, right. So almost in every town, every county, everywhere there's a MLK Boulevard, right? And usually along that is an African American community. In most major cities and a lot of other places, you can see a area that is a Latino or Hispanic area. Same with, we call them, suburbia, classified as, that, which I think suburbia is becoming a subculture. I'll get to that in a second. But you see that around towns, right? And I think that though understanding and holding on to your heritage is important, I agree with you in the sense of America itself as a melting pot, as a culture. And when you look at that culture, you have to have some elements of all of it, right?
So by then reaching out and grabbing some of these other elements of some of these other subcultures or some of these other cultures in a sense and bringing it into the American culture, is that not strengthening the American culture at all?
100% agree. And that's why I'm a big proponent of, some people who are cultural don't think that we should celebrate certain other holidays. You've seen the left try to make this movement too, right? Like Cinco de Mayo and Thanksgiving
Day and being Indigenous Person's Day.
Yeah, and only Black people,
happy
Xmas,
holidays,
and only Black people should celebrate Juneteenth. No, I think we should all celebrate all of it, right? Because it's all the melting pot. We should create more holidays that add to the American experience. You know what I mean? Juneteenth shouldn't just be a Black thing. It should be that is Black people's version of Cinco de Mayo. And though we're not necessarily celebrating, in a sense, Mexican independence that way, like we're celebrating that subculture of the American culture. Like same thing we would do with St. Patty's Day, same thing that we do with, we need one in order to really indulge in our community.
Yeah, because especially when or large parts of our nation as a whole are made up of these cultures that are then coming over here, and it's essentially us it's almost an extension or a welcoming of this new culture, this new nation that's coming into this and saying, okay, so I see where, we know where you're coming from. This is our way of saying, okay, you're welcome to America.
Yeah.
We're going to acknowledge some of your more fundamental and prosperous holidays and recognize that within our culture and our nation.
Yep. And that's a perfect segue into why I believe that suburban is a subculture. Right?
This I'm curious about.
Because when everyone thinks about suburbia, right? You think about the nuclear family, mom, dad, son, daughter, or some other kids, a house, a yard, you know what I mean? One car that you only drive on Sundays, a SUV, and then, dad's work vehicle. Okay. That's what white picket fence. That's what everybody thinks about when they think about suburbia. I believe that has no color. So and I go back to what we call in Georgia the Black Flight. All right. So when civil rights movement, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, okay, beforehand you had completely segregated neighborhoods. You had the full separation. In Atlanta, we refer to it as the Black Flight because that was the first time that generation felt that they could leave the black neighborhoods of Atlanta. Which is why you see certain pockets of area, like my home area of Bankhead, that everyone points to as a black hub in Atlanta, but is one of the most underprivileged, detrimented areas in Atlanta now, is because everyone says, hey, we were from there, but we left, right? Suburbia has no culture. And what I mean by that, well, has no race. And what I mean by that is we have now reached a time in America to where your merit is what puts you where you are.
So essentially the middle class, and we're getting to where we're not even going to have some of that.
We're not even going to have some of that if we continue to allow
this new Inflation Reduction Act takes place.
Which is, see, now you're really getting me deep into what will be my thesis one day.
Well, let's not go into that.
Well, not to dabble too much, right? But that's why I feel that one party is trying to really create policies that end the middle class, whether you're either high ranking or you're poor, and move more towards a socialist regime, because then you create that fine line again. Whereas if it's all based upon your merit and everything else, there's no way of separating that subculture. We all live next to each other because we earned it.
I got you. Well, speaking of 5 points and Bankhead and everywhere else, that rolls right into what our next topic was life wins in Fulton County.
Fulton County itself.
So I'm going to bring this up, and we typically don't do this, but I'm going to pop that right back up there again real fast. So that, for folks who don't know, is his name is Judge Robert McBurney. Judge Robert McBurney, in a ruling just this week, came out and said that, well, so we all know that Roe v. Wade was essentially redirected and sent back to the states to ultimately decide whether or not each state would go forward with allowing abortion rights within their states. Well, Georgia had the heartbeat bill. They're the organization, I want to get this right, Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, tell me about it. When I see that name, I picture a mouthful of a woman there.
Justice Collective.
Yes. So
SWCRJC. You can't even make that acronym.
No.
Okay. I know. I'm sorry.
So essentially what they did was they filed a federal lawsuit that said that, well, they had been the ones to file the federal lawsuit that had ultimately stopped the heartbeat bill from being able to go into effect until Supreme Court weighed in on the Dobbs case. After the appellate court remanded it or essentially said, no, we're not going to allow this, or we're not going to stop this. So it went into effect. Well, they filed a lawsuit in Fulton County to essentially say that it needs to stop at the state level because it is against the Georgia state constitution. So, and part of what they were doing was they were acting for injunctive relief, meaning they were asking for, while this case is being decided or being heard on its merits, that it not be allowed to go into effect. Simply, it needs to stop until this is decided in the courts. Well, Judge McBurney came back and said, "Nah, it's so fast. That's not going to happen that way. Georgia law actually says that I cannot stop laws from going into effect while it's being worked through the legal system."
Yep.
It's interesting to note that essentially the claim that they're trying to make in this being unconstitutional with the Georgia Constitution is that it is a violation of the right to privacy, which is another topic that we had discussed. The lawyers for this organization are saying that it would essentially allow for invasive intrusion into a woman's private medical records without a legal warrant or subpoena, and for them to be prosecuted based upon that unwarranted search of their private records, which I don't see that. If it is flat out banned and not allowed to be practiced at the state level at all, why would there be private medical records that were reflecting that it was being practiced?
Because they're not talking about going back and prosecuting anybody who did anything before the law went into effect, which is the only, so that's my whole thing, right? Like if that was like, I think, I can't remember, maybe Texas, I don't remember, to where they can go back and they're backdating or whatever to a certain date, like that argument could be heard. Do you see what I'm saying?
Is that what Texas is doing? Because I
have no idea. I really just pulled that out of the air. I don't think that's what Texas is doing.
That they were doing.
But if it was something that they were going back to a back date, then
you're constitutionally protected from that being able to happen.
Correct. Because essentially it's grandfathered,
yes.
right? So like that's why I feel that their argument is wrong in the sense is that no one would be violating, because the only right to, I guess you could say the only right to privacy that we have would be HIPAA, right?
Well, no, so the Georgia Constitution and specifically Georgia torts does recognize a right to privacy, or more specifically in Georgia torts, the right to privacy in the Georgia Constitution, like the right to privacy in the United States Supreme Court Constitution, is an inferred right. It's not actually detailed, but Georgia torts does specifically lay out issues involving the right to privacy. So there is a legal issue with that. However, there is not a constitutional issue with that. So essentially, their claim to begin with is just
for me and everybody else who listens to our show. Let me say it back to you, because your mind works in a legal way that still got to grasp. Okay, so basically, what happens is though there is not a defined constitutional right in the United States for privacy. There is a defined constitutional right in the state of Georgia?
No. It is the same inferred right in both the U.S. Constitution and the Georgia Constitution. Essentially, the Georgia Constitution.
There's a level of privacy. Okay, in the Georgia Constitution, continue.
Yeah, it essentially reflects exactly what the U.S. Constitution says, is that you are secure against unwarranted search and seizures.
Okay, so we reflected that unwarranted search and seizures, you have a right to privacy against those. There has to be some kind of evidence, or
it has to go through a judicial process in order for a search or seizure of
any documentation, like product paraphernalia, anything of that nature. Okay. All right. So we understand that. So HIPAA, right, because we are talking about medical, is a right to privacy.
It's more of it's a codified means of prohibiting medical professionals from selling or transferring your medical records in a way that it could be leaked and made public.
So, all right, perfect way example. Let me give an example to make sure I'm understanding it right. So the way that like when I sign up for something on Facebook, okay, and in the terms and agreements, it says that they can sell my email address to go to these companies, and I start getting random emails because I signed up for something. That is not allowed by your doctor because of HIPAA. Well, in a sense of they can't give your information out to give an example. If your doctor says you have high cholesterol, they can't sell it to a high cholesterol pill maker to start sending you unsolicited information.
So your personable, identifiable information, no. However, what they can do is they can say, I have X number of patients that I see in this facility that have these specific medical conditions.
And this is how we get drug pushers.
Yes.
Because then the doctor can go in and say, I have a certain number of people who I see that have this condition. And because of that, I can get X number of dollars for if I sell your drug. Let me get your drug and then push it on my people.
Yes.
All right.
Now, there are some provisions of HIPAA that do allow for your personal information to be compiled in a sense, especially
compiled but not sold or given out.
Well, there's a very tricky line there, because defining giving out is, because it would actually go to third party organizations and agencies, but then they would that they're only supposed to use these for statistics and essentially trying to organize medical information that they can use to determine the likelihood or path of wellness of the country. But they can give your individual personal defining medical information in some of these instances.
In some of that sense.
So there is no overriding. So
there is
HIPAA does not cover actual medical privacy. There are there are a lot of provisions within that law that allow for your personal medical information to be given out and in some instances sold to a lesser degree.
Interesting. So I say all that to say this. So there's no, for all those who are in fear, right? If you had an abortion previous to the day that the judge ruled that this is okay, that there's nothing in your past that can come back to haunt you.
Nothing.
And in going forward, it's just that you cannot have this procedure done.
It's just, so there's nothing in your past that can come back to get you. And you would not be able to have that procedure in the future because it would be banned under Georgia law, and the medical providers would not be able to
even give you that option.
Exactly.
So that's why their point is minute, and why he threw it out is because of the fact that
he didn't throw it out. What he said
he can't stop.
Yes,
he can't stop it, because what their point is saying that they didn't understand the law basically, and was saying that they couldn't come. They're trying to argue that people could come back or anything of that nature.
Well, they're trying to say that if a woman or if a medical provider goes against the law, then under the law here that the mother could be prosecuted as well for having that abortion, for having that termination, as well as the provider. So they're saying that the medical records, which they're trying to say are some of the most secure and private records, which I would agree with them on that, would be subject to unwarranted searches and seizures, to where they would not, or so essentially they could come in, go into a doctor's office, pull up a patient's chart and see if they had an abortion, if they had a tip that somebody had been receiving abortion services in these facilities.
That's why I linked it to Texas. Okay.
Yes. And they are now trying to say that because somebody can come, or because the law enforcement agency can come in and do that, that they are not actually going through the legal procedure of getting these warrants and these subpoenas in order to view these records and these medical proceedings. So they're trying to say that even though a medical provider may be breaking the law, and the mother may be breaking the law and killing their unborn child, and the doctor committing murder, that they should not even know that this is going on, simply because they should not have access to the patient's records in that instance.
Gotcha. And that also goes back to why I was linking it to Texas, because there was and correct me if I'm wrong, there was the part about Texas to where if someone knows that you had an abortion after a certain time frame, then they could come in and say something, and then there is a form of prosecution or something of that nature.
So what you're referring to is the fact that any medical provider can be sued by any citizen of the state of Georgia for providing abortion services that would go against Texas's heartbeat bill.
So that's just in Texas, not in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So that does not apply to Georgia law.
Nope.
And we're not saying that any doctor can come back and be sued or anything of that nature. It's just saying we just outright
cannot
ban abortion after
cannot be retroactively applied.
So that goes back to this whole idea of, well, the whole thing that we've been trying to say with this entire show, that once again, Democrats have no idea what they're talking about. They're just fighting a narrative that they're putting out there.
Well, I mean, we see that
across the board.
Sense with that. Yeah, absolutely. Again, so before we're gonna take a little bit of a jump, because that actually gets us into one of our conspiracy topics, in which Buck is actually laughing his head off, because it now appears that the CDC is on the run. They're running scared. And according to Buck and his interpretations of why this is happening, it is solely because of what these bureaucrats are essentially seeing what everybody across America is seeing, that the Democrats are about to lose power, and they're about to face an all Republican, we'll call it a physical red wall that's coming.
Yeah. Can we play? Don't we have a clip for this?
Not yet. That kind of is the last points of what that is.
Because since we're going to switch this up a little bit, like I just have this goes back to me. All right. And interesting, since we're talking about culture and everything else, right? I feel that I have an embedded, soft-heartedness for bureaucracies, right? Because to a certain degree,
you are a bureaucrat.
Well, that and, just culture and history, right? Whereas I have a skepticism against
subculture and history.
Subculture and history. No, yeah, because my subculture would be...
Your culture's American.
Yeah, true and true. I do have a hesitation and a lack of trust in the medical field, right? Which is why I have a really hard time with what I'm seeing out of Fauci and what this mantra from the DNC has been doing. And especially this administration when it comes to our medical our medical rights, and them trying to tell us what is necessary and when it really may not be.
So what's going on here is, so the CDC has made essentially, they are saying that they are now going to be doing a lot of reorganization, a lot of reconstruction from us, the top down. So the highest person in the office all the way to the bottom. And I'm not going to give her the due credit of actually looking up what her name is, but the head of the CDC, she's again another one of Biden's political pawns. He's moved her around throughout this entire COVID era, based upon the guidance that have been put out from Dr. Fauci with the NIH. But what they're essentially saying is that they had been wrong on virtually every single issue that had been of a major concern or major controversy about COVID. That masks should maybe not have been used to the level they were, because they didn't actually have any defining data on that vaccines possibly shouldn't have been pushed as hard as they were, because come to find out natural immunity was just as strong as any of that schools probably shouldn't have been shut down. Businesses should not have been shut down. They're coming out and they were saying, look, we know at this point in time, COVID's essentially done and dead. And we should treat it just like we do the flu. Yes. Yep. And we're sorry for messing up the way we did. Well, they screwed up so bad in handling this that I don't think that there is coming back from this.
No, I mean, lives
were ruined and lives were lost. or livelihoods were lost. Or I'd even say lives were lost.
Look, man, I got a heavy disgruntled for the medical field. Like, I'm allergic to penicillin because what they did to my people 70 years ago, because that's how they tested penicillin, was they tested it on black people when it came to syphilis and everything. They intentionally infected black people with syphilis to try to get them and test penicillin. Because of that and the history just behind people not being able to get care and everything else, I just do not trust the medical field. Never have, probably never will. And it just goes to show another reason why, because they're very discretionary and discriminatory when it comes to what they believe care should be, all because of whatever preference there is at whoever's running your hospital or whoever's at the top.
Well, this is uniquely introspective in that area especially when it comes to political preference, because all of these things that we saw, all of these things that they're coming out and admitting they are wrong on were being pushed so heavily by the Biden administration and the Democrat caucus at large that it can't be seen as anything other than politicized. I mean, you had Biden come out and write a mandate for the military, for the medical field. He tried to do the private sector to where if you didn't get this vaccine, you got fired. Well, they're still firing people in the military. They're not doing it in the medical field because they've already purged the medical field outside of folks that didn't receive a religious exemption or a waiver. But it's interesting to see now that they have come out and dropped all of their guidelines. There's no more masking guidelines. There's no more vaccine guidelines. There's no more quarantining guidelines for folks who are unvaccinated. They're saying schools should be reopened and all this. And now they're coming out saying, well, we got caught up in the heat of the moment and we screwed up. But you should still trust us.
Yeah. And anyone who understands even the slightest bit of government and politics knows that the people who are going to be in charge now are the ones who set the budget. So when I get my budget next year, and my budget gets cut by half or more,
hopefully,
you know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to operate? You're going to be the ones laying off people.
Heart disease, I would say genetic diseases, various infections and such. I would say no, those continue to be funded by the CDC from a research perspective only.
Hands
the
down.
CDC should never, ever again be able to issue guidelines that have authority.
Again, that goes back to what we were talking about when it came to the EPA rulings and everything else. These are agencies that should operate like bureaucracies and should not by any means have any authoritative power. Nope. They should only be able to be allowed to do research and investigations and then turn that over to the authoritative agency,
the legislatures
that can make those decisions.
Absolutely. That is the sole purpose of what the CDC was set up under. But because of the Biden administrations, their perversion of this group was so vast that it became essentially a rule-making body that had no oversight outside of Biden himself and was able to push all this stuff that essentially ground America to an absolute halt.
Well, see, that's why I want to go back to the arrogance of Fauci. And, because even then, right? Think about this. NIH is separate. It's a separate agency. And the Institute of Health is also supposed to be just a research facility.
Yes.
It's not supposed to be this glorified political body. And what they've done is the same thing that we saw, which is what worried a lot of people when it came to elections. What we saw was you see in large masses and across the masses from counties, they are conservative Republican held and ran. So the Democrats, what they did was they infiltrated these appointed positions. And, to a certain degree, Republicans, we allowed it because we felt that it was fair. And we felt that these individuals could be partisan when they really couldn't. And they only used that opportunity to be nonpartisan and only used that to be partisan. And
So I'm going to play the clip he's talking
Essentially
about.
Take over.
Well, the Fauci effect, which is sort of like, as trust me, I don't get excited about that. I mean, it's nice, but I mean, people go to medical school now. People are interested in science, not because of me, because most people don't know me, who I am. My friends know me, my wife knows me, but people don't know me. It's what I symbolize. And what I symbolize in an era of the normalization of untruths and lies and all the things you're seeing going on in society from January 6th to everything else that goes on, people are craving for consistency, for integrity, for truth, and for people caring about people.
So what he's doing there is he's bragging without actually bragging. He's saying that there's this term that folks use. I don't really, it's nothing to me, but it is used in certain terms or in certain circles called the Fauci effect. And it's where, because of me and my undeniable or search of truth and this, I am the ultimate shining light of everything good in American, that we have more people coming into the medical field and going to medical school, and I am their inspiration. I am the reason why they are doing this. That's Fauci. That's who he is. It's always been that way.
Hey man, I'll say it this way. I think that a level of confidence and arrogance is healthy for an individual who is trying to grow themselves. But arrogance used in a tyrannical method is the devastation of any empire when they are in leadership. And him running the NIH at this critical time is just proof that we have a problem.
When you make yourself essentially what would be described as an adverb, you have a problem.
That's just like people referring to themselves in the third person.
Yes. Although
I do that often.
I was going to say.
Look, that's what just was like, but which one are you today?
So that kind of takes, or we can jump into our kind of our last topic on this. And this is that Buck he's
put it together.
He's cracked the code. He's figured it out. He's figured out why we are seeing such a surge in the overdose in regard to fentanyl. Well,
and here was the other thing too, right? When you look at all the other, I guess you could say, drugs that have been a problem over the last decade, like the last decade or two, and we start talking about the whole opioid epidemic, you can really kind of look at how this became a problem and trace it all kind of back to the same source, right?
So I'm going to pull that up and put that up there. That way we can allow everybody to see exactly what we're referring to on this. And so as far as what
Oxycontin,
we're calling the Pacific drug triangle.
Oxycontin, Roxy's, all those you can trace back to levels of codeine and all this other kind of stuff, which is where, and I hate to say it this way because I've had people affected by it, but it's trial and error with pain management, you know what I mean, which is a good thing inside America. We're trying to figure out what's the best combination to make people healthy again.
Yes.
Fentanyl, though, has grown into a problem, and it almost is like it sparked overnight and no one really knew where it came from. And that's what kind of like Butt put together.
Yeah. So essentially what he's doing here, and you can see that on your screen there in front of you, is so this map or this document is, as you can tell, we have the where it's actually coming from, but it is a document that was produced by the DEA in regard to how the fentanyl flow into the United States started around 2019.
And wasn't this in the DEA's report for the hearings, or
that I'm not sure.
Okay.
That I am not aware of.
I'm just trying to get information where this document came from for our listeners, so they can go pull it up themselves too.
Oh, so if you just if you Google DEA fentanyl flows United States 2019, this document should pop right up. And it's a 4-page document. And it's a PDF.
And I'm pretty sure
easy to find.
One of the 3 other agencies has probably covered this in some hearing. You can go to C-SPAN and probably talk about the opioid epidemic. You can Google that too to see the videos in congressional hearings.
Yep. So essentially what this document is showing here is that it's showing where fentanyl is originating from, where the chemicals are the secondary products that are needed in addition to the opioids are coming from, and where they're going and how they're moving their way into the United States, and how they're getting from these origin countries into the United States. So you can see on here that any of these areas listed on this map identified with a number 1 is that fentanyls in powder form, as well as unregistered pill presses, stamps, and dyes, are shipped via mail services. So these, if you're looking at India and you're looking at China, so essentially where this is going to really, so where all this is coming from, China has implemented some very stringent laws in regard to some of the secondary products that are needed to take the opium that China produces and turn it into fentanyl. So it's a secondary powder and a product. So China has very strict regulations on the manufacturing of those. However, India does not. So what they're doing is taking these products from India and sending these products into China, where China then mixes it in with the opium and creates fentanyl. And then they are taking that from where they're mixing it out and then sending it over to Mexico, and Mexico is moving it back in. However, they are also sending some of the opium, some of the fentanyl, or the final fentanyl powder product, and sending it back into India, who India is also shipping it over to the United States. It's interesting to note, though, that Mexico in of itself has seen that, well, what if they cut out the middleman and they just start manufacturing and pressing these pills and these drugs themselves? So they are just getting the raw ingredients from China, from India, shipped to Mexico, where they're mixed and made there, and then pressed into pills, and then sent up into the United States, even sent up into Canada, where they are then crossed over into the United States at a much lower
That's what
rate.
I was just looking at this chart,
it is done,
because you can see based on the chart that's here in the graph, to where some of this, which just kind of reiterates what you just said, some of this is going straight from China straight into Canada, right? Which means that that few that's coming straight into the United States, that's where you're starting to see more influx straight to Mexico, because they're starting to get weary. So they're trying to bring in more so that they can move it.
So what's being shipped from China directly into the United States are the actual pill presses.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
so it's already in pill form.
The
press itself.
To press itself to where
they can make
they can take the powder coming in from Mexico, move the powder up through the southern border up to the presses in the United States, where they are then pressed and compacted into the pill form, and then sold and shipped out to Mexico as well.
Wow.
Yeah, this is something that you don't really hear a lot. You hear that China is the reason why we're having a lot of these issues, but what we're not hearing is that India has a significant involvement with this as well.
Which is why we start talking about the BRIC BRIC countries. So when we refer to the BRIC countries, we're referring to Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
Yes, because
they have started to collaborate, not just for this basically drug smuggling, but for you've heard us on previous shows talk about the rebuilding of Silk Road, the Eastern version of the IMF. All of that is established and built on by these, 4 countries.
Yeah, they are the 4 fastest growing economies in the world, and they collaborate with each other quite frequently. A lot of the kind of unfinished products, as far as some of the raw products that are needed to take opium to make it fentanyl, are manufactured in Russia and sent into India and China, especially nowadays, now that China and India have become Russia's little buddy, because no one else in Europe or Eurasia wants anything to do with Russia because of their war with Ukraine. It's also interesting to note that Brazil is quickly becoming the 5th largest pharmaceutical producing country in the world, meaning that they produce more are pharmaceutical drugs and their companies that are in Brazil produce more of these drugs than out of all. So they would be fifth out of all the other countries in the world. So they are rapidly becoming a global powerhouse in the area of pharmaceuticals. And they have also been linked to several raids where state-owned pill or pharmaceutical manufacturers were producing some of these opioid medication or these opioid drugs.
Interesting. It's interesting when I take what we're learning to produce the show, what you know and what I know, and we put it all together. Because, you know, we've talked about this offline as well, is that, you know, the Bank of Hong Kong, or HSBC, as most people know as the acronym, which is basically like the Bank of China, has got caught by international regulators, you know, basically laundering the money for the Mexican drug cartels. And because we don't have, you know, these global regulations, that all we really have is sanctions, there's no way of stopping it, that they just came out in a letter and just acknowledged it. And we're like, yeah, we're doing it. Good luck stopping us. So then when we put it to how does that affect the American people, right? Here it is, you know.
Mexico's sending the money to buy the equipment, to buy the raw products, to buy the opium into China. China is then washing it and using it.
Washing the money. Then they're taking the product itself, cleaning it with India or getting part of the product from India, then sending all the raw materials back to Mexico. Mexico is then pressing it and then shipping it out, and then the cycle continues.
So it is a drug triangle in of itself.
Yep.
Although it maybe not so much of a triangle as opposed to
an oval.
A one-way ticket.
Yeah.
So it circulates and starts in China and India, and then just winds up killing Americans in the streets. But what we like to do at the end of every episode, we always like to remind you to make sure that you like and subscribe to, or like and share any production that we put out on any of the social media platforms that we do. We put these productions out on. Also, make sure you subscribe to anything that we put out there on all the platforms, so you can stay up to date with everything going on. And if you're able to, go to our website there on the screen and help us out by hitting the sponsor tab in the upper right-hand corner or the lower right-hand corner, and help us out with what you're able to. It really goes an incredibly long way in everything that we're really being able to do, and really will help further our reach and what we want to do in the future. While you're there, also make sure that you sign up with your email address, and that way we can keep you up to date with an upcoming bi-weekly newsletter that we're wanting to put out, and kind of give you a sneak peek into the big project that we've been bragging about here so much lately. So
with that, can I do my favorite part?
Let's do it. So
80 days until we beat Stacey Abrams. Cannot wait.
Looking forward to it, but I'm also kind of looking forward to what we can do in the future to replace that segment.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun. But you know what? I'm ready for this Brian Kemp win.
I'm right there with you on that one. So any last inspirational words of wisdom?
Chop on, go Braves. Let's go Falcons. Go Brian Kemp.
And with that, thank you for tuning in.
See you guys.